Welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. Today, we're going to discuss the top 5 generic Legion consoles. That is, the consoles available to every one of the Legions. While many players out there are taking a Praetor for their HQ selection to unlock their chosen Rite of War and calling it a day, it's worth having a close look at what each of the consoles can do for your army. Every one of them has their place. The 5 I've picked today either put out damage inconsistent to their points cost, or do something for your army that cannot be done by your basic Legion units. I've ranked them in order from my 5th pick through to what I think is the number 1 pick for a Legion console, that every single army in the game will benefit from taking in a list. A quick note before we get into it, a subscribe and a like really helps us reach a bigger audience, so if you enjoy the video, please hit those buttons down below. Also, be sure to check out our affiliate link in the description. Now, for those new to the game, a Legion console is essentially an upgraded Legion Centurion. Legion Centurions, Legion Cataphracti Centurions, and Legion Tartarus Centurions can all be upgraded to consoles, though it is important to remember that there are certain console options available only to your basic Legion Centurion that are not available to your Terminator Armored counterparts. Alrighty, with that out of the way, number 5 for my pick at top consoles. The absolute beatstick that is the Moritat. I was playing at Jolt the other week, and a local Blood Angel player I've had the pleasure of playing a few times was playing on the table behind me. We chatted throughout the game, and I asked him how he'd found his Twin Inferno pistol Moritat. He looked a bit guilty and stated that he probably wouldn't be taking him in too many other casual games in the future. Apparently, he'd just absolutely wrecked face. So, what does the Moritat do? Well, now, if we look in the book, the special rules he has are Scout, Counterattack, Bitter Duty, and the Chainfire special rules. Notably, he cannot be selected as your army warlord. So what is Chainfire? And this is, of course, what makes the Moritat so special. Chainfire essentially allows you to, with each of your pistols, and you're always going to be taking 2 pistols with the Moritat, with each of your pistols, you get to make 6 attacks. Now, if that pistol happens to have 2 shots to it, such as your Volkite pistol, Volkite Serpenter, I believe, then you would get to make a total of 24 to hit rolls for those 2 pistols. 6 times 4, essentially. 2 pistols, 2 shots each. It's insane. If you have a 1-shot pistol, you get to potentially make 12 2-hit rolls. Now, the only thing here that is limiting the output potential is that pistols with the Gets Hot or Armor Band special rule, which is essentially most of the pistols that you want to be shooting with, if you roll a 1 to hit, you have to stop shooting with that pistol. You do then get to start shooting with the other one though. So you're on average still going to get out, 7+ shots with these pistols unless you get tragically unlucky. While rolling a few dice before, I did manage to hit that mighty 12, and I assure you if you pull that off in a game, it's going to feel so good. Now, there are some other things around chainfire. Essentially, you can't charge is the other main one after you make a chainfire attack, so just keep that in mind. Now, there's a few loadouts, and each of them have their place. Disintegrator pistols, plasma pistols, Volkite Serpenters, which, even without the great AP value with the Serpenters, you're statistically still going to kill 5 or so power armored lads, but there are certainly other Volkite wielding squads that do this better. Now, there are a couple of Legion-specific loadouts too. The Blood Angels and Iron Hands come to mind. The Blood Angels get to take Inferno pistols for their Moritats, which are best to take out Terminators and other elite Legion-specific units with Toughness 4, not to mention vehicles. And then you have the Iron Hands, who get to take 2 Grav pistols on their Moritat, which is just so good at taking out Dreadnoughts that it's ridiculous. I think that Iron Hands Moritat is actually the best unit in the entire game for taking out a Dreadnought. Now, if I'm not running Iron Hands and I'm not running Blood Angels, how would I run a Moritat? Well, you almost always want to give this guy a jump pack, and unless you're Blood Angels or Iron Hands, as I said, either 1 or 2 Disintegrator pistols, depending on how many points you've got and how bold you're feeling. You want to link him up with a decent-sized destroyer squad and probably have him deep strike onto the battlefield. I would argue that unless you can deep strike with your chosen Rite of War, you probably want to pass on this console, because deep striking is where he becomes a real pain in the backside for your opponent and really dangerous. His max weapon range is between 6 and 12 inches, depending on the weapon you're choosing, so putting him in a transport is just asking to have it blown up and his effectiveness neutered early on. Now, the destroyers are there to not only act as a blade of wounds, but to give you flexibility on your deep strike deployment if you scatter, to make sure you're always in range with your pistols. Don't forget, when you deploy in deep strike in 2nd edition, it's within coherency and you can really string those guys out. Okay, why is the moritat so good? One of the very few units in the game, let alone HQ choices, that can just utterly delete a 2-wound, 2+ save unit from the table, all on his own. He's got access to reliable and plentiful AP2, which is so rare in 2nd edition, except for, well, this guy. Players are turning to 300-point 10-man las cannon squads to fulfill this role, and the moritat does it for cheaper and is far more maneuverable as well. Be aware, however, that he doesn't get his chainfire special rule during reactions, so you have to be strategic with how you use him, where you place him, and what you target. He is also a pretty risky and expensive option. Depending on what you arm him with, it's pretty likely a moritat armed with an AP1 or AP2 weapon with the Gets Hot or Armorbane rule is going to melt himself in the process. You do only have 2 wounds after all. Just the Gets Hot, I should say. You're not going to melt yourself in the face with Armorbane. There's just the potential that you stop shooting during chainfire. So because you only have 2 wounds and because you can't take a Terminator armored moritat, it's risky, right? The Gets Hot are going to hurt because they're going to get through your armor save. Sure, you've got your 5+ invulnerable, but will you kill this guy yourself? Probably is the answer to that. But you're going to take a hell of a lot of the enemy, hopefully, down with you while you do. And look, every time you chainfire and don't roll a 1, it is going to feel so good. Worth it for the adrenaline rush, if nothing else. So that is moritat, my number 5 consul. Next up, coming in at number 4, we have the rather unsexy, but I believe game-winning herald consul. I'm not sure if people are still on the fence on the importance of line units, but after having played a bunch of games with my Alpha Legion, I can say that my Linnaean Terminators, because they have the line subtype, absolutely win me games. And line units are going to be what gets you across the line in a lot of your missions. So what does the Legion Herald bring to your army? Well, let's find him in the book. Please excuse the sound of turning pages in the background. Here we go. Special rules. The Legion Herald gains the Fearless and Fear 1 special rule. When it comes to war gear, they can exchange their bolt pistol, bolter, or combi bolter for a Legion standard at no additional cost. So not much going on there, but geez, what an impact it has. I'd usually take a Herald in Terminator armor, whichever type suits your fancy, as you probably want to be putting this guy in big blocks of Terminators. Cataphracto armor is probably your best bet, as besides the extra wound you get from being a walking tank, a 4+ invulnerable save will help against every single enemy nemesis bolter that's going to be aimed squarely at this guy's head. Alternatively, you can have a bit of fun and give your Herald either a combat bike or a jet bike. And while Outrider or Skyhunter units aren't particularly impressive right now, giving them line, making them fearless, and diminishing the leadership of every enemy unit within 12 inches with Fear 1 suddenly kind of makes them interesting. I'd pass on the jump pack for this guy unless there was a Legion-specific unit, such as Night Raptors or Dark Furies that you wanted to give line to, which I should say is 100% worth doing. Okay, so why is the Herald so good? Let's go down the list of rules this guy's handing out. So Fearless is both quite rare and fantastic on big units. Failed leadership checks lose games, and they happen more often than you'd want. The unit your Herald is in is just never running, it's never getting pinned, but also it's not taking advantage of the Shrouded rule either, so a way to get Feel No Pain in this unit or having it natively is not unwelcome to where you're going to put him. Fear is a completely underrated rule. While you're boosting up your own leadership with this guy, you're also undercutting your opponents. It's a 12-inch bubble at -1 leadership, which is just insane. Combine Fear with Night Fighting, and suddenly your opponent is failing more leadership checks than they're passing. You can pin their entire army to your absolute heart's content once you get this guy in amongst your enemy's units. Next is the Legion Standard. All units with a model within 6 inches of the Herald has Leadership 10 for morale and pinning checks. So, is making his own unit fearless, and making sure those units around him probably aren't going anywhere either. Use him smartly, and he just holds an entire flank of your battle line together by himself. Lastly, and this is what we really care about, he gives the unit he joins the line subtype, making them a scoring unit. Now, you need scoring units to win 5 out of 6 of the missions in the Age of Darkness rulebook. Arguably, if you can make every unit in your army line, you probably should. But in the meantime, making any unit you can join a character 2 scoring is just really great. Big units of Terminators, tough Legion-specific units, fast-moving units, even long-range units to hold your backline objectives without giving up threat potential. There's not really a bad choice here. Remember that it's the Herald and his Legion standard that provides the line subtype to the unit he's with. So, if it looks like your current unit is going to be destroyed or tied up away from an objective, detach him, move him on to a different unit, and now make it scoring instead. As a tool piece for winning games, the Herald is completely unparalleled. Also, as an aside, what an absolutely awesome reason to convert up an amazing looking miniature with a giant standard, or some other cool trophy to inspire your army. I just love this guy. Now, there's certain armies and certain Rites of War that won't need the extra line units. A Pride of the Legion Space Wolves army could probably do without him, for instance, but they're few and far between, and a Herald is something you should definitely consider if you're finding yourself light on line units at the end of a game. Alright, at number 3, we have the Legion Delegatus. I see a lot of armies, and even at smaller points level games, taking a Praetor. Now, Praetors are fine, they kill stuff good, and Leadership 10 is always nice, but usually, and I am generalizing here, because I can, people are taking a Praetor to utilize their Master of the Legion special rule and open up Rites of War. Because Rites of War are good, they're free special rules, why wouldn't you take them? Take them, almost always, unless you have some crazy thematic and narrative reason not to, in which case, hats off to you. But me, I love me some free rolls, so I always try to take a Rite of War and build my army towards it. But Praetors are expensive, and besides Master of the Legion, don't really give you anything wonderful, special that other units couldn't maybe do better for the points cost. I would argue, and this is going to be controversial, that if you're ever considering taking a Praetor, you should instead take a Delegatus. Boom! Leave your anger in the comments below. But here's my reasoning. A Delegatus not only gives you the Master of the Legion special rule, but he does so for far cheaper. A bare bones Delegatus in Artificer armor is only 85 points. That's a bargain, people. Give him a couple of Lightning Claws, which is the cheaper option at only 15 points, bumping him up to 100, and you've now got a nasty surprise for your opponent to hang out in one of your line units. Yes, he's cheaper than a Praetor, but the real reason you want to take him, and why he's better than a Praetor, is because he has the Rally the Legion special rule. So let's track that down in the rulebook. Legion Delegatus, here we go. Rally the Legion. Once per battle, at the start of any of the controlling player's turns, this rule may be activated. Once activated, take a leadership test for this model. If passed, then all friendly units that are all friendly units that are pinned or falling back and have at least one model that can draw line of sight to the model with this special rule immediately rally and are no longer pinned or falling back and may act normally. So, even if he turns around or unpins just a single unit, he's turning a real losing situation into a winning one. The real strength here is that the unit that was pinned or running away can act normally this turn, firing at full ballistic skill or going on to assault in the assault phase. There aren't too many gotcha moments in Heresy, but I can assure you that your opponent, having pinned a big, beefy combat unit, will carry out the rest of their turn with the assumption they don't need to worry about it. Pulling a cheeky Rally the Legion out of nowhere and having that combat unit suddenly able to strike at the heart of your opponent's army can be utterly crippling. In a game where morale is so vitally important and pinning is becoming a very popular tactic, the Delegatus gives you a huge level of redundancy to turn games around and keep your units in the fight. For the second most impactful consul, I have chosen the Chaplain. The mechanics around weapon skill and hitting in close combat saw one of the biggest shakeups for this new edition of Heresy. Hitting things got a hell of a lot harder, with weapon skill 5 units getting a major boost, and a lot of weapon skill 4 combat-focused units left in the dust. And while rerolls to wound are plentiful, through chainswords, chain bayonets, lightning claws, rerolls to hit are not. What's the answer? I would say the Chaplain. So if we look at his rules, a Legion Chaplain and all models in the unit he joins gains the Stubborn and Hatred Everything special rules. In addition, the Legion Chaplain increases his leadership characteristic to 10. Very nice. War gear. A chaplain with a power weapon may grant that weapon the Mastercraft special rule for no additional points cost, representing his Crozius Arcanum that is a symbol of the chaplain's authority. Nice little bit of flavour in the rules there, GW. Love to see it. So, essentially, in the first round of combat, whether you charge or are charged, you are going to reroll hits. Certain units are going to do better with the chaplain than others, for sure. Prime choices include veteran squads, Terminator squads, assault squads, and despoiler squads. But honestly, it's not unlikely that your elite weapon skill 5 Legion-specific close combat units, what a mouthful, are going to come up against other weapon skill 5 units during a game. So, essentially, if a unit wants to hit hard in close combat, a chaplain is always a solid force multiplier and worth taking. As a chaplain impacts the damage output, but not the durability of a unit, putting them in a unit that strikes at initiative is probably optimal. While a Primus Medicae might be the better option for a unit armed with Power Fists, Thunderhammers, Power Axes, and the like, those unwieldy weapons. Now, I'm particularly excited about putting chaplains in an Emperor's Children army to take advantage of that initiative 5 on the charge, and just steamrolling opponents with unnecessarily large assault squads. Chaplains also do really well in squads with melter bombs to assist in getting past the Dreadnought's high weapon skill. Even a few melter bombs in a squad is going to do work against the Dreadnought if you're re-rolling to hit and to wound. Now, how you get them out isn't overly important. It's all about that hatred special rule, but a power weapon, the obvious choice, which, as we've read, gets you mastercrafted for free. On top of that, a melter bomb, for the reasons I mentioned above, seems great, and that's probably enough for the chaplain. As discussed, the chaplain also grants the unit leadership 10 and stubborn, which is just fantastic. Stubborn is very impactful in this game, and there aren't many ways to give it to your basic power armored units. Veterans, being so expensive and only leadership 8, would particularly benefit from this boost. Terminators, with their inexorable special rule, maybe less so. Okay, coming out on top as the best consul in the game is, and I'm sure many have already guessed, the Legion Librarian. Now, the Librarian gains access to the core psychic disciplines in the rulebook, which, for the most part, all have some really useful psychic powers, depending on your army build and your style of play. I'll quickly go through the core psychic discipline powers to give you an idea of what you can do. So, Biomancy's power increases a unit's strength and toughness by 1. While it won't always be useful, it will usually result in actually kind of a 35%-ish damage swing in your favor, and that's pretty great. Best on basic lads who aren't going up against dreadnoughts would be my advice for this one. Next up, Divination's power gives your unit precision strikes and shots on a 5+, which can be really sneaky. Imagine this on a Lascannon wielding heavy support squad. There's no better way to completely undo an opponent's Death Star unit or any synergy handed out by characters than instant deathing them with precision Lascannons, or maybe picking them out in combat with precision Power Fist to the face. You do have to build this power and deploy to take advantage of it, and then target your opponent's characters, be clever, but it can be a really nasty surprise for your opponent. Pyromancy, when used en masse, just gets ridiculous. I probably wouldn't bother running a single librarian with Pyromancy, but if you're running 3 or more, and I'm looking at you, Thousand Suns, suddenly you're putting down a lot of Strength 6 large blast markers, which are sticking around in your opponent's turn as well, making their movement phase an absolute nightmare. This is a great way to play mind games with your opponent and just control the battlefield, control their movement. That's how you win games, people. Now, telekinesis is best used in a gunline army that doesn't need to do too much movement, or at least a dedicated section of your army that is going to be able to sit in your deployment zone and project damage across the table. A 16-inch bubble of 4+ invulnerable saves is just really, really good. Heavy support squads, sniper units, rapier batteries, even tanks, any of them, are all going to take great advantage of a librarian with telekinesis. It's only the librarian himself, and obviously unit that is attached to, that can't move to get the power off, so as long as some of the models from those other units don't move outside the huge 16-inch bubble, you're good to go. Take advantage of wound allocation to make this even more abusive. You can be really clever with this one. Next up, Thaumaturgy is going to have some niche uses, but can be very rude when combined with the right units. In particular, you're looking for units made up entirely of characters that can spread wounds around. That's right, a mechanic that still exists because of GW's dodgy rules writing. Invictus Suzerain, Inner Circle Knights, Cenobium, and Phoenix Terminators are your best options here out of the Liber books. Put a wound on each miniature in the unit, cast Thaumaturgic Succor, and get a wound back on each 5+. It's going to make these units even more of a pain to deal with, though potentially more work pulling off than it's worth. Now, all of these disciplines have psychic weapons, but none of them are particularly impressive or are overshadowed by the Librarian's Force weapon or conflict with their power, so I haven't mentioned them. I've just been talking about the powers. Now, the same cannot be said for the Telepathy psychic discipline, whose power and weapon are both just obnoxious. Telepathy is by far the most powerful discipline, and you're going to see a lot of it in more competitive environments. So, what does it do? Well, it pins units and it shuts down reactions. Have a good read yourself to understand quite how powerful that is, then try it out in a game and realize that it's even better than you thought. What's particularly rude, and please comment if you think I'm reading this wrong, is that the psychic weapon, telepathic hallucinations, there we go, is written in a way that it ignores rules like stubborn and inexorable. It gets around them. Furthermore, and this is very much up for debate, not how I played in games, because I think it would just be a bit too good, this psychic weapon could potentially pin a unit before it gets a chance to make a return fire reaction. Meaning, depending on how it's ruled, the unit is either returning fire at ballistic skill 1, or controversially, the unit doesn't get to make a reaction at all, seeing as it's now pinned. Either way, it seems very powerful. Let me know how you think it plays out with reactions in the comments. I'd love to see your thoughts. Now, the psychic power, telepathic, that word just gets me every time. Telepathic fugue is an absolute game changer. Reactions are just so important for so many units, and this power shuts them down for that unit for a phase. It's so good. Great example is heavy sport squads. Las cannons, you got a 10 strong heavy sport squad with las cannons. You don't want to shoot at that because it's going to shoot back and absolutely wreck whatever you're shooting with. You cast this at the start of the shooting phase on that heavy sport squad as long as you're 24 inches away, and it can no longer do reactions in that phase, and you can shoot to it to your heart's content without any concern. It is just, there's so many reasons to use this power, and there's so many circumstances where it will just win you games. Now, to round out the Librarian, they get a free force weapon and can take a psychic hood. Psychic hoods, expensive at 15 points, become very relevant in a Librarian-dominated meta, but otherwise can be left at home. I guess see how many enemy Librarians kicking around, and if the answer is lots, take a psychic hood, because each of these powers that I've talked about, to get the good version off, or sometimes just to get it off in general, you're taking a leadership check, which if you fail, you're then taking wounds. Now, force weapons, however, your Librarian gets a free force weapon. Force weapons are great. I'm personally a big fan of a Force Axe, which can be combined with another close combat weapon to give the Librarian 5 attacks on the charge, hitting at weapon skill 5, I'm pretty sure, and can give a Dreadnought a real hard time in close combat at strength 9, AP 2. Not to mention any elite troops with 2 wounds as well. The Librarian is just an amazing toolbox consul for your army that can still do serious work in combat. I've been using a Telepathy Librarian in my new Alpha Legion army because I have no dignity, and I cannot overstate how useful he is in each and every single game that I've played. And there we have it, my top 5 consuls. The Moritat, the Herald, the Delegatus, the Chaplain, and at number 1, the Librarian. While I think these 5 are the best, and please comment below if you have a different list, almost every one of the consuls are worth a look. Try them out, see what best supports your army, get creative, and hope your opponent doesn't bring too many Nemesis bolters. I hope you've enjoyed this video and gotten some new ideas for your army. Make sure to keep rolling those dice and getting hyped for Heresy.